Can we switch? No, can we switch to the present? Can we switch to the presentation? Previous page. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to present our, to introduce our second keynote speaker. Professor Cher Ping LIM is a chair professor of learning technologies and innovation at the Education University of Hong Kong and the editor-in-chief of the Internet and Higher Education Journal. He was a professor of education and director of international partnerships and director of Asia Pacific Center for Excellence for Teacher Education and Innovations in Western Australia before moving to Hong Kong in 2010. Over the last 2 decades, he has engaged major education stakeholders at the national and international levels. These include UNESCO, the Asian Development Bank, Microsoft, the World Bank, and others. His research and development partners take up the opportunities for digital technologies for the enhancement of education quality and equity. Today, we are going to listen to him present his talk entitled ICT-Enabled Teacher Professional Development at Scale for Quality Access to Education. Please help me welcome Dr. Cher Ping LIM.
Can't be moved. Okay, I'll just stop over here. Okay, hi, a very good afternoon to all. I'm Cher Ping, or Chirp. This is my first time at the ICCE, which is quite strange because I know quite a number of you here, but just never got the opportunity to make it to this conference. What I'm going to be sharing with you would be one of the initiatives that I am leading that is funded by the Canadian government, right? It is called TPD at Scale for the Global South, right? So Teacher Professional Development at Scale for the Global South, right? I think I'm just going to be sharing with you some of the vision, mission, and research that we have been engaged in. But I think the key purpose of this keynote is more to try to tap upon the brains in here, try to tap upon your expertise and experiences in terms of helping us address some of the issues and challenges that we have identified as we are engaged in TPD at Scale, right? So with that mindset, I would want to share with you what is TPD at Scale, what have we been doing, and what are some of the key issues and challenges that we are facing, and how you could actually help us to address some of those key issues and challenges. Right? I'm from the Education University of Hong Kong. It used to be called the Hong Kong Institute of Education. It is the sole, okay, not sole, but the key or the main teacher education provider in Hong Kong, right? And I am mainly focused on learning technologies and innovations. Used to be very much in K-12, but I think in recent years, since I went to Hong Kong, the focus has been on the so-called the higher education, teaching and learning in terms of the use of technologies and the integration of the innovations. Okay, so as what I've said, this particular project that I'm going to be sharing with you is actually funded by the IDRC, right? It's the International Development Research Center. It's like the USAID or the AusAid or UK aid in the UK, Australia, and the US, right? Except that for the IDRC, the focus is on research and development. I'm quite sure you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goal 4, right? The SDG 4. And I think when we are looking at the SDGs, the one that really pertains to education, right, is actually SDG 4, where we are looking at inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. This is quite different from the MDG, right? The MDG, which is the Millennium Development Goals. I think the focus is on access, right? But when we start to look at the SDG, right, the focus is very much on the access to quality, right? So it's not just building another school in a particular district or a particular province, but it's actually to ensure that there is access to quality education, right? And the capacity of schools to be able to promote lifelong learning, like capacity of the students. And I think for like those of us that are very much engaged in education research, regardless of what education innovations that you are looking at, it's quite clear that teachers are really pivotal, right? So teachers are pivotal as we try to achieve SDG 4, right? They must be able to engage students in their learning, and they must be able to equip them in the lifelong learning competencies. But I think it's when we are looking at the global south especially, right? The developing and emerging countries, maybe in Asia, Latin America, Africa, or the Middle East, right? We would know that there is a massive global teacher shortage, right? And there's a lack of capacity, like there's a lack of the capacity of assisting teachers, right? That actually act as a bottleneck to SDG 4. I think if we look at some of the data that have been gathered by the different international organizations, right? Like in 2016, the UNESCO warned that close to 69 million teachers need to be recruited and trained, right, in developing countries. If we are trying to achieve the SDG 4, and quite often when you look at the assisting teachers, they are quite poorly trained, which means that there are actually issues with both pre as well as in-service teacher education. Right? If we just look at the African continent alone, we actually know that more than 25% of the school teachers have not received any formal training at all, right? May it be pre or in-service teacher education. Okay, so what is TPD at scale? We know that there is a global shortage of teachers. We know that there are issues with respect to the quality of teachers, right? So, which means that if we are going to run a teacher professional development program, we must be able to run one that can reach out to the teachers, not just like within the city, but also outside the city in the rural, remote areas, right? So, like, how do we reach out to these, like, teachers? And I think what we are trying to achieve in this particular initiative is that we are trying to harness upon the potential of technologies, right? To be able to address, right, the tension between quality, equity, and efficiency. Okay, just let me briefly share with you what do I mean by the tensions between quality, equity, and efficiency. Okay, when you are looking at a TPD program, right, there are a set of effective TPD principles, right, from the need for the TPD to be applied to teachers' practices, right? The need for peer mentorship, the need for coaching, the need for feedback, right? So those are the effective TPD practices. And the thing is, we know that in order to have quality teacher professional development, you must be able to draw upon a set of TPD principles that would be able to address the quality, right? But the thing is, at times, quality teacher professional development can be quite labor intensive, right? As in, you might have one facilitator or one instructor working with 10 to 20 teachers, right? To be able to provide them with constant feedback, to be able to provide them with in-context support and coaching when they are trying to apply what they have learned in their own practices, right? So once we start to ensure quality, at times we might be compromising on access, right? So if you are trying to create access to quality, it might require a high financial cost, right? And a high opportunity cost for the country, right? So especially in the developing and emerging country, I think that really causes a strain to the resources. So you might be able to come up with a quality TPD program, right? But the thing is, once you try to create access, to try to ensure that that access to the effective TPD, right, is being created to teachers from the rural and remote area, right? The tension then would exist, right? So that's the tension between quality and equity. The whole notion of efficiency, we are looking at it from the internal efficiency as well as external efficiency. So when we are looking at internal efficiency, it's about cost, right? So like, how do you keep costs low, right, for a TPD program as you are trying to move it up to scale, right? So how do you ensure a cost-effective program that is able to ensure access to quality teacher professional development without blowing the budget of the country, right? So those are the tensions that you have in terms of internal efficiency. And of course, in terms of external efficiency, it would be when we are getting teachers to undergo their own like professional learning, right? As they undergo a particular TPD program, how do we ensure that whatever that they have learned is actually relevant to what is actually happening at the workplace, right? Which means that quite often TPD programs that actually work in a particular school might not be applicable in a different school but in the same district, right? So there might be some external efficiency issues there again, right? So what we hope to do is to be able to draw upon the potential of ICT, right, in order to be able to address that tension between quality, equity, and efficiency. Okay, and of course, when we are looking at TPD at scale, I think we are not just looking at massive open online courses, but we might be exploring a possibility of a blend, right? Which I would be sharing with you an example of like what is going on in the Philippines right now, right? Since we are in the Philippines, I think it is appropriate for me to share a Philippines example, right? Where we are making use, tapping upon the potential of emerging technologies, right? To be able to reach out to teachers living and working in diverse and often the under-resourced context, right? So we are trying to ensure the equity in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of social, economic, and in terms of being able to reach out to teachers working with displaced communities, right? Like the refugees, that are going into Bangladesh from Myanmar, for example, right? Or the different refugees that are in the Middle East. Like, how do we ensure that we are able to build a capacity of teachers working with such displaced people? Okay, as I've said, just to give you a notion of, so like, what do we mean by TPD and TPD at scale? This is a program that is run by the Department of Education in the Philippines, right? It is technology-supported teacher professional development in the early language literacy and numeracy for K-3 teachers, right? It was first a pilot project that is funded by the USAID, right? But the thing is, based on the evidences that were provided from the USAID pilot project, it was eventually so-called like bought over, as in the Department of Education in the Philippines actually bought over the idea. And then eventually what they are trying to do is they are trying to actually roll out the professional development program to 190,000 K-3 teachers in the Philippines, right? So we are really talking about scale. We are not just looking at a few thousand teachers or tens of thousands of teachers, but just within the K-3 sector, we are looking at 190,000 teachers, right? This like numbers are actually quite small, because if you go to countries like Bangladesh, right, you'll be talking about at least like 500,000 teachers in the secondary sector, right? If you move to countries like Indonesia, right, basically the whole teaching workforce is about 1.2 million teachers, right? So it's about trying to be able to build their capacity in order to be able to implement a particular curriculum, may it be a revised curriculum, a new curriculum, or the existing curriculum, right? In this case, this particular program was actually trying to build a capacity of the early childhood education teachers who are working in the K-3 sector when a new curriculum, when a new K-3 like curriculum was actually implemented in the Philippine school, right? So it actually started out. Okay, I don't have the slide on the history. It actually started out with the teachers or the Department of Education wanting to roll out the teacher professional development program using a cascade model, right? That means like working with groups of teachers, the expert teachers from each school, and getting the teachers to eventually work with the teachers in their own school, right? But the thing is, based on the Philippines experience, I think quite often such a cascade model have quite serious issues with respect to quality, right? It creates access, but the quality actually varies, right? From school to school and from the division to division, right? So what the Philippines government wanted to do then is trying to tap upon technologies, right, in order to be able to create a blend that would still draw upon the learning facilitator in each particular school or across different schools, right? But at the same time, drawing upon the open courseware, right, whereby teachers can be working through it themselves, because we got to be aware that even in the larger Manila itself, right? If you go out to Quezon City, there are still quite a number of schools that have issues with power supply and internet connection, right? So, which means that when we are talking about a blend here, the blend itself is actually looking at both an online as well as an offline open courseware, right? Whereby the teachers would be working in small teams within a school, right? And it would always be facilitated by a learning facilitator. So within each school, there might be between 3 to 4 learning action cells, whereby the teachers would be working through the open, they would be actually working through the open courseware themselves, right, with the guidance of the facilitator, right? So the facilitator would also have a set of guidelines as well as support, as well as the support materials, right, in order to be working with the teachers through the courseware. These are just some basic screenshot of the open courseware, like nothing too sophisticated, right? As what you could see here, there are audio files, videos, there are the guiding questions for teachers to reflect, and there are tasks for teachers to be able to complete when they go into a classroom, right? So these are just some screenshot from the open courseware. Okay, so when we started the pilot, we actually did an evaluation of the pilot, right, to be able to capture the learning gains from both the teachers as well as the students over a 1-year period when the pilot study was being conducted in selected schools over different divisions and regions in the Philippines, right? And what we hope to be able to do as we expand the program in June 2019, right, is that we would be able to tap upon some of these learning action self-facilitators that would serve as learning facilitators across schools that are picking up the program. So they might be working across schools or they might be working within schools, right? And hopefully we'll be able to work across schools within a district and of course across districts as well. Right, so this would be one example of what we mean by TPD at scale. Of course, I would be able to give you more examples from China, whereby the Peking University is working on a massive open online courses, especially to reach out to teachers in the rural areas in China, right? Or in the India, whereby there is some sort of a blend that looks very much like this. So there are various programs that we could share with you, but I think due to the limited time, I'm just sharing with you this particular example since we are in the Philippines, but it would give you a very good idea of what do we mean by TPD at scale, right? So the scale, I think we are really looking at either the division level, the region level, or the national level at times. Okay, so with this whole notion of TPD at scale in mind, right, what the initiative have done is we have recently set up the TPD at Scale Coalition for the Global South, right? And what we really want to do is to bring different stakeholders of education and technology, especially those that are very much involved in the work of international development. And of course, those those different organizations with pots of money to spare, right? Like a USAID, AusAid, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, etc., etc., and trying to bring them together as a coalition to be able to work towards the attainment of SDG 4 through collaboration, research, and implementation support. We actually did the first coalition meeting in Hong Kong this year in January, where we involved more than 30 organizations worldwide. So you will see that we were trying to bring together key stakeholders from government bodies to international organizations, research centers, NGOs, as well as government agencies, and also the banks like the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Right, so these are basically a list of the participating organizations that were involved in the first meeting. We are trying to work on the membership of the coalition over the period of next year. Right, so if you're keen, you can always talk to me, drop me an email. Okay, the key vision of the coalition is that we want to be able to ensure quality education for all with empowered and effective teachers, right? Because as what I have actually argued in the beginning, that the role of the teacher is pivotal, right? Whenever we are talking about a curriculum or assessment reform, right? So it is key that in order to be able to achieve SDG 4, we need to ensure that our teachers are empowered and effective, right? The key vision, going back to the triangle again, we want to promote quality, equitable, sustainable, large-scale ICT-enabled TPD through collaboration, research, and implementation support. This is basically the first time that I am doing this presentation in front of like researchers and scholars. Like what I've done in the past is very much talking to policymakers, international organizations, as well as the different banks, right? So I think there is a big role that researchers and scholars like yourself, especially in emerging technologies, could contribute to this work, right? To be able to tap upon some of the emerging technologies that you're working on, right, to be applied to the TPD at scale context for the Global South. Okay, the objectives, as what I've said, we really want to be able to support governments. At this point, we have started working with the government of Cambodia, Bangladesh, with respect to their TPD at scale program in Asia. We are in talks with the governments of Brazil and Argentina on working on the TPD at scale for their secondary school teachers. We are like working with Professor Diana Lorilat in her project in Jordan, right, to be actually working with teachers that are serving displaced communities. Okay, so I think the key thing that we want to be able to do is to, based on the research that we are engaged in, right, to be able to support governments and international organizations that are working on teacher professional development. Right, we want to be able to support research and knowledge sharing, right? So we want to be able to like bring like some of the work that you are doing, right, like the participants here, and to be able to share with policymakers and practitioners, right, about trying to introduce some of the innovations that you have been working on that are able to create the evidences and are able to show the possibility of sustainability and scalability, right, to the work on TPD at scale. Right, and we would also want to harmonize efforts and investment in TPD at scale in the Global South. So like the example that I was telling you about in Cambodia, we are trying to work on a TPD at scale program for higher education teachers, right? So like teachers and practitioners like yourself who are teaching in the universities and teaching in the research centers, right? And for them, they are actually drawing upon their funding from the World Bank, right? So we want to be able to work like together with them to be able to ensure that the investment in their TPD efforts within the higher education sector would be cost-effective and would be informed by the latest research and development. Okay, so TPD, we have been talking about TPD for so long, and this would be something that you all would be very familiar with. We know that teacher professional development is definitely not a one-off workshop or one-off program. It is a continuous process from pre-service to induction to in-service teacher education, right? It's long-term continuous. It might be formal, it might be informal. So like a formal setting, very much like this, an informal setting, very much within a professional learning community, either within the school, across schools, or across countries. When we are trying to conceptualize TPD at scale, right, we are aware of what the challenges in the global south are, right? So especially when working with international organizations, we are aware that one of the key issues is the quality of teachers, right, in the developing and emerging countries that need to be addressed. We know that quite often not many teachers have the opportunities for continuous professional development, right? There are some countries that might hold their professional development of teachers or the professional development for teachers during the weekends, right? But the thing is, by holding those professional development classes or program over the weekend, they might be marginalizing the female teachers because due to some gender stereotyping, right? The female teachers might be expected to be spending time with their family, right, over the weekend rather than the male teachers. So there are countries that we have been working in whereby when you go to a teacher professional development workshop, about 90% of the participants are male, when only less than 30% of the teaching workforce are male. Okay, so these are the issues that would need to be addressed, the diverse school environments, the gender-based, and some of the asymmetry within the system itself, right? Those are the challenges. And we know, think through the work of like Professor Linda Darling-Hammond and the colleagues, we could see a lot of different effective TPD models, right, that are based on very sound like principles in terms of content focus, active learning, collaborative learning, models of effective practices, coaching, feedback, sustained duration, etc. Right? Those are basically effective TPD principles. And when we start to look at scale, I think we are really trying to draw upon quite a relatively new field, right, as compared to the challenges and TPD, which is the learning at scale, right? I think which is probably an area that I think the participants here are definitely much more familiar than myself, right? And I'm quite sure there are a lot of the expertise in this room that are familiar with the different emerging technologies and innovation in terms of learning at scale. MOOCs, open courseware, intelligent tutoring system, peer learning networks, etc., etc. So those would be the learning at scale components. And when we bring the three like circles together, I think the intersection that we really want to achieve, right, would be TPD at scale, right? But I think I've got to say that based on the research that we have been doing so far, the literature review, in terms of TPD at scale, quite a lot of work has been done in terms of just two of the circles, 2 out of the 3 circles. Yes, there's a lot of work done in terms of learning at scale, right? But it is often not within the teacher professional development context, right? So when we look at the literature on TPD at scale, I think quite a lot of the focus of it is on effective TPD, right? And there is also probably just slightly less in terms of how those TPD are being applied in the Global South. Okay, so TPD at scale, the intersection between effective TPD, learning at scale, addressing the issue of challenges in the Global South. Okay, for the next 10, 15 minutes or so, I would share with you the landscape review that we are engaged in right now. So as what I said, within the coalition, we try to tap upon different sources of funding, right? So when we wanted to do a landscape review of TPD at scale in the Global South, right, we managed to co-fund this particular part of the project with the like the USAID, as well as DFID, which is the UKAID, right? And what we are trying to be able to do is to be able to look at the research and development work that have been done in terms of using ICT to accelerate TPD towards the achievement of SDG 4. Okay, these are just some of the preliminary findings, right? Because we just started the landscape review in after the summer, so I would say about mid-August, late August, right? And based on the documents that we have been prying through, these are just some of the key principles that we were able to tease out from the different documents. One would be the effective TPD at scale models would be based on effective research TPD practices, right? So it is always informed by TPD principles. When we are looking at the word at scale, right, we know that those TPD at scale projects that have been successful usually start planning for scaling and sustainability from day one of the project, right? With the intention of scaling up to the whole district or the whole province, for example, or the whole country. The focus is really much about pedagogy, the pedagogies that are being employed, right, for the TPD at scale program. It used a blend, and because we are often working in very low resource type of areas, so quite often we might be drawing a lot on the offline technologies rather than online technologies, right? And there need to be a blend in terms of both ICT as well as face-to-face. We are also looking at more of just-in-time rather than just-in-case. And the ICT resources that are being developed for the professional development, it must be locally customized to be quite aligned to the national curriculum, right, to be relevant to the teachers. Right, and of course, we need to provide incentives for the teachers to engage. Okay, so when we look at some of those key principles just now, you could see that it's not just about the TPD at scale program. At times, you're also looking at the larger ecosystem, right? The ecosystem in terms of what policies do schools have in place or do governments have in place to ensure that there is incentives for teachers to want to engage in professional development. Okay, back to the Philippines as an example again, since we are in the Philippines. Yeah, yes, no, yeah. Okay, so I think in the Philippines, the Department of Education just came out with a new policy whereby teachers must renew their teaching certification every 3 years, right? And because they must renew their teaching certification every 3 years, which means that they must complete X number of courses and programs, right? So that serves as an extrinsic motivation for teachers to want to engage, because if they lose their teaching license, they could no longer teach in school, and therefore they could not bring home the bacon, right, to the table at home. Okay, so we are actually not just looking at the program per se, but we need to be aware that there is a larger ecosystem that we are looking at, right, in terms of the program. We know that good TPD at scale practices, it must be translated to classroom practices. The teachers must be able to observe themselves and observe the other teachers. There need to be time for reflection in terms of what they have learned and what they have actually applied. There should be some sort of a professional learning community that might be mediated or enabled by technologies or not technologies. And of course, as what I've said, there must be very close collaboration, right? Because quite often teachers are usually government officials or government employees, right? So it is quite crucial that we work very closely with the local governments as well as the national government. Right, and we might be tapping on different partners as well, may it be foundations, NGOs, private sector, the technology companies, Microsoft, Intel, etc. Right, tap upon some of their programs and be working with them on the TPD at scale program. Okay, so these are some of the key principles that we have teased out. And to be able to design monitoring and evaluation at the beginning of the project, that there is a need for both formative as well as summative evaluation as we are working on the program. Okay, as we move from the principles to the issues and challenges, as I've said, what we realize is that quite often we are not able to see much focus on the learning at scale dimension, right, in the TPD at scale program research, right? Okay, so some of the key issues are about when you are getting teachers to engage in professional learning, you want them to be able to monitor and manage their own learning process, right? So when the teachers are working not in school but at home, right, what support can we provide them, right, for them to be able to manage their learning process, right? Like, how do we provide them with opportunities to reflect what they have learned, right? And would technologies be able to actually provide those opportunities for critical reflection and management of learning? The development and the building of the professional learning community, I think that is always quite a key issue in schools sometimes, right? Given that quite often teachers' time in school are just spent teaching and marking and not much time for interactions and sharing their practices. We need to create incentive for teachers to engage, but as what I've said, maybe that is an ecosystem issue, right, rather than an issue that we could really address within the TPD at scale program. There definitely is a need for more personalized learning because like working with teachers in schools, not just in the global south, but also in the global north, as in the developed countries, right? We know that teachers' competencies levels are very different. So, like, how do you actually provide a more personalized learning experience for the teachers, right? Especially if it is done like offline rather than online. Teachers definitely need learning support, just like what students need, right? Teachers are expected to support students' learning, but quite often they do not know how to learn, right? So, like, how do you support teachers to learn how to learn and to be able to learn, right? And one of the key issues that actually does not just pertain to TPD at scale, but also in learning at scale, is how do we assess teachers, right? Like in this case, when we are putting 190 K-3 teachers through the TPD at scale program, how do you actually assess teachers that they have actually successfully completed the program, right? And how do you assess for learning as well? Or like how do you use assessment for learning for the teachers to learn as they are working through the program? So those are some of the key issues and challenges that are coming out through the literature that we have been looking at. And of course, one big problem is always measuring teacher professional learning outcomes. Like, how do we actually measure their capacity? I know that, like many of you here, you have been drawing a lot on the TPAC, right? But is TPAC sufficient, right? Is TPAC all-encompassing? Probably not, right? So, like, how do you actually measure teacher professional learning outcomes? You probably say that maybe there's like no need to, but I think when you are dealing with policymakers and developing agency or development agency and banks, those are the questions that they would often ask. We are going to be spending $90 million, as in 90 million USD in Cambodia, right? So how do we know that what you have proposed is going to have an impact? And how do you showcase that impact, right? And the thing is, we know that quite often showcasing the impact would mean to be able to demonstrate transformation in teachers' practices. And teachers' practices sometimes could only be captured in teachers' practices within their courses and classrooms, right? And could you go down one level and start looking at student learning outcomes, which are technically the so-called the indirect but main beneficiaries of TPD at scale, yeah? Okay, so these are some questions that I have for you, right? So rather than you ask me questions for the next 5 minutes, I throw you these questions, right? Just in case there's dead silence, at least I can question you. So these are the questions that I would really like to address at this point, right? How could emerging technologies be harnessed and blended to address these issues and challenges? And as I've said, most of these issues that I've shared with you are actually learning at scale issues. How could we measure and document the impact on teacher professional development at scale without compromising on the efficiency of the program, right? So we might be able to say that we can observe classrooms, just like one of the World Bank projects in Guangzhou, right? They are actually going to the rural schools in the Guangdong province, right, to be observing teachers and videoing teachers. But that is a very labor-intensive and a very high-cost strategy in actually trying to evaluate, right? So again, like, how do we do that without compromising the efficiency, right? Would we be just depend on self-assessment questionnaire, right? Like what the TPAC is basically like doing? What are the TPD at scale models that are appropriate for the Global South? How could these models be adopted, customized to be scaled up like within the country and across countries, right? So these are the 3 questions that I have, which I hope you all would answer me, or you could provide some like responses now if you want to. But if you do not want to, this is me. Okay, this is really me. As in, it was my self-portrait 30 years ago when I was a 20-something, right? But that is the email address, right? If you want to engage more in some of the questions that I have raised in this presentation itself, Right, so back to these questions again. These are the questions for you to think through. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cher. These presentations remind us that we still have a lot of work ahead of us, don't we? All right, are there any questions?
No, you're supposed to answer the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. We are there. I'm sorry. That's an answer?
I would, okay, it's not exactly a complete answer, but I'm Jay Krishnan. I was a graduate student in, so I'm now with Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, India. During my PhD thesis, I exactly tackled these problems, but the context was higher education. But I think the model would be almost similar even from, yeah, I tried it in higher education within India. The context also almost similar. Some colleges do not have enough resources. So how do you empower teachers across these colleges? So I think there are 3 steps to it. One is bringing in connectivity. So we had a large government mission, on top of which we had the outreach project running. We call the project Educational Technology for Engineering Teachers. The model that I developed was for how to train teachers. The model is attain, align, integrate, and investigate. We tried it in multiple settings, face-to-face, blended, and even on a MOOC platform with a blend. And what we have seen is over a course of 4 years, we have trained close to 135,000 teachers in higher ed in use of specific technologies. So these technologies are like the content creation and curation technologies that they can use. The results of this PhD thesis, that was now converted into a large-scale faculty development program that could give these teachers credits in their academic improvement. So that has been running successfully for the past 2 years. We are into the 4th offering of that program right now. It is on a platform, a MOOC platform called IIT Bombay X, but it's not the platform that is important. As you mentioned in your slides, the pedagogies of using, so what you call as learning action cells, we call them remote centers. So it's basically a hub and spoke. But what we are trying to do is, whatever activity we do, we empower the spokes to be the next hubs. So over a course of last 3 years, we have developed a community of almost 500 teachers who could be the next emerging trainers. And I have my colleague Lucian, who is working on the sustainability angle of it. He's working on the cascaded model. How do you scale and sustain the cascaded model? He's adding one more context. He's from Tanzania, so he's looking into the African context also, so which is like pretty much bang on to this thing. And if you're interested, I'm presenting one of the offshoots of my study in the next one of the presentation sessions. It's at 4 o'clock, 4:30 at room B, I guess. Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think like we are definitely interested in like hearing and knowing about more of this like studies and more of this like the initiatives, not just in the developing regions and countries, but also those that are like going on in the developed and the global north as well. Okay, I'm actually just like joking that you have got to respond to these questions now, right? But I think if you do have any questions, I'm more than happy to address it like at this point in time. Yeah.
I don't have a question. I do have a suggestion kind of thing, because this is a group of researchers in education. Like I do see, like I have interacted with a few people. I do see there are also teachers, and even the early research career award this time was for someone who was a teacher. So just a suggestion for APSC could be like to have some a number of participants from the local country who are teachers, like who may not have actually done a research, but be part of the conference, like maybe 5% or 10%, like so that there will be enough interaction, teachers or teacher trainers, whichever is feasible and practical. I'm not sure. That's a suggestion from me. Yeah. Thank you.
Questions, response?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm very interested in this agenda. There's just one little thing. Are you comfortable with this terminology, the Global South? I know UNESCO's been using this for a long time, and when I first heard it in Europe, I thought that's a very strange idea to be thinking about the North and South. And I noticed that many of the members who are participating, they are not in the South. And I say this obviously because I come from Australia. But
yeah, that's the Global South.
So my question is, are you comfortable with that terminology? I'm surprised that it still persists.
I'm of course not like comfortable, given that New Zealand and South Africa and Australia is in the south, right? But I think the reason why we use Global South because just to be consistent with what the international organizations and banks are using. But I think quite often these days most people use developing and emerging countries rather than the Global South. But we have stuck to that because of the partners that we have, as well as the IDRC, which is our main funder, which is also using that term, the Global South, right? So it's like Global North working with a Global South, yeah. Yeah, but thanks for pointing that out, yeah. We are good? Yeah.
All right, we will close the question and answer portion. Chirp will be here until the end of the day, and so if you would like to engage him in further conversations, please feel free to seek him out. For now, we would like to thank you so much, Chirp, for your very informative talk, and we have a small token of appreciation for you. Because we know that you are starving already, there are snacks available, and we will, I think the sessions resume at, I think, 3 o'clock, correct? Yes, 3 o'clock in Hall A, Hall B, and then in the rooms, in the conference rooms over on the other side. Thank you very much.